Today we're kicking off an in-depth journey into a country that is seriously ancient, ridiculously beautiful, and has a history so dramatic, even Game of Thrones would be jealous. We're talking about the Czech Republic, or as the government officially short-named it back in 2016, Czechia. Now before we get into the castles and the epic beer, you have to know how this place came to be. It's a landlocked country in Central Europe, made up of the historical regions of Bohemia, Moravia, and a sliver of Silesia. And the story starts way back, almost 2,500 years ago, in the 4th century BC. So who was here first? It was the Celts, specifically the Boii tribe. And guess what? They're the ones who gave this place its original Latin name, Boiohaimum, or the root of Bohemia. But as with all of history, things shift. Around 100 AD, the Germanic tribes moved in, and then in the 6th century, the Slavic peoples arrived and became the dominant group. This laid the foundation for the Czech state we know today. Fast forward a few centuries to 863 AD, and we see the first big ideological crossover. Two Byzantine Christian missionaries, Cyril and Methodius, arrived in Moravia, introducing the Slavic liturgy. But the Roman Catholic Church was a big influence here, and it would become a huge deal for centuries to come. So, come the 14th century, Czech enters what's known as their Golden Age. During this time, Charles IV of the House of Luxembourg became the ruler, and this guy was a boss. He became the Holy Roman Emperor in 1355, making his kingdom rich and powerful. He also founded Charles University in Prague in 1348, and then made Prague the royal and imperial capital. But this Golden Age also brought in lots of German colonists who made up about a third of the population, which, yeah, you can imagine that started some ethnic tensions that wouldn't resolve well later. Now, things get intense. In the early 15th century, a religious and social reformer named Jan Hus became popular, following the English theologian John Wycliffe. His followers, the Hussites, challenged the church, and in 1415, Hus was burned at the stake as a heretic. What followed were the brutal Hussite Wars, where the Hussites actually defeated 5 crusades launched by the Holy Roman Empire. And as a result, they kept Catholicism eclipsed in Bohemia for 2 centuries. Now, the next major shift happened in 1526, when the mighty Habsburg Empire started its long process of taking over. Czechs and Germans actually united to lead a Protestant uprising against the Catholic Habsburgs, but in 1620, the Battle of White Mountain returned Habsburg rule and kicked off the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Then, as the Habsburgs centralised power in Vienna, the Czech language and culture were suppressed for nearly 200 years, which is why this period is often referred to as the Dark Age. It wasn't until the early 19th century that the Czech national revival began, meaning industry boomed, textiles, sugar, iron, and a new interest in Czech culture and language surged, championed by folks like the linguist Josef Dobrovský and historian František Palacký. Even the great composer Antonín Dvořák was writing his famous symphonies and operas during this time. But you know how these stories go. The opportunity for true freedom came with the ultimate disaster, World War I. So when the Austro-Hungarian Empire crumbled, the path was clear. That's why on October 28, 1918, the independent state of Czechoslovakia was founded. And their first president, the brilliant Tomáš Garriga Masaryk. Now this is where the story shifts, because in 1938, the Munich crisis hit. Adolf Hitler demanded the annexation of the Sudetenland, a border region that housed a large German population. In an act of devastating appeasement, Great Britain, France and Italy, without Czechoslovakia even present, agreed to sacrifice these vital territories to Nazi Germany. It was a massive betrayal that left Czechoslovakia defenceless. Unsurprisingly, just 6 months later, in 1939, Hitler marched in and invaded the rest, turning Bohemia and Moravia into a German protectorate. This led to 6 years of brutal Nazi occupation, which included the horrors of the Holocaust and the devastation of World War II. After the war, the restored republic fell straight into the Soviet sphere of influence. A communist coup d'etat in February 1948 sealed their fate, and for 41 years, Czechoslovakia was ruled by the Communist Party. Thousands faced persecution, and basic freedoms were non-existent. The only attempt to break free during the Cold War came in 1968 with the Prague Spring. Alexander Dubček, the leader at the time, tried to introduce socialism with a human face, loosening restrictions on media, speech and travel. But the Soviet Union saw this as a threat and, along with other Warsaw Pact members, brutally invaded in August 1968 to crush the reforms. It wasn't until 1989, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, that the change finally came via the Velvet Revolution. This was a non-violent transition of power, led by students and dissidents, forcing the communists to resign. It was fast, it was peaceful, and it was historic. And after that, playwright Václav Havel, a longtime dissident, went from prison to the castle, becoming the first president of post-communist Czechoslovakia. Now, the final chapter of this long story is the Velvet Divorce, and what this essentially means is this. On January 1st, 1993, Czechoslovakia peacefully dissolved into two independent countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Václav Havel became the first president of the Czech Republic. Since then, they've been on a path toward integration with the West, joining NATO in 1999 and the European Union in 2004. And today, it's a stable, multi-party parliamentary democracy. But enough about history now. Let's talk about the land itself. Because you can't understand a country until you understand its geography. First things first, the total area of the Czech Republic, or Czechia, is about 78,867 square kilometres, or 30,451 square miles. And it shares its land with four major neighbours. The longest border is with Germany to the west, followed by Poland to the north, then Austria to the south, and finally Slovakia to the east. Here's a cool fact for you. There's a divide between two massive European mountain systems, the Hercynian and Alpine Himalayan, that actually runs right through Czech territory. That means most of the country is a mix of hills and highlands, with a decent amount of actual mountains to hike. You can find the lowest point where the Elbe slips out of Czechia, near Hřensko, or you can climb way up to the very top, to Snížka, which absolutely dominates the giant mountains at a towering 1,603 metres, or 5,259 feet. Oh, and remember those three historical regions? They're basically the main geographic zones too. Bohemia is the big one in the west, home to the capital, Prague. Its geography is like a fortress, a basin naturally surrounded by mountains, which historically made it super defensible. Standing guard around Bohemia are mountain ranges like the Šumava Mountains in the west and south, and up north you've got the Sudeten Range, which includes those stunning giant mountains where Snížka lives. Then you move east into Moravia. It's a little cooler and less rainy here, thanks to the altitude, which is actually perfect for wine growing. Its capital, Brno, is the country's second largest city. Finally, the smallest piece is Silesia, tucked into the northeast of Moravia. It's more of a historical and cultural area than a distinct geographic one, but its cities like Ostrava and Opava and its famously debated borders make it a fascinating spot for history geeks. So, because Czechia is tucked right into the centre of the continent, it gets that classic, temperate continental climate. Translation: 4 distinct and generally manageable seasons. Summers are pleasantly mild, with lowlands averaging about 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit in July. Winters, they bring moderate snow, usually staying just below freezing in the lowlands, around -1 to -2 degrees Celsius or 30 to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Now you've got the lay of the land, but what does life look like when you zoom in on the politics and the cash flow? So let's check in on who's running the show, shall we? The Czech Republic is what you call a pluralist multi-party parliamentary democracy. Think of it this way. They've got a president who is the head of state, and then a prime minister who's the actual head of the government. Right now, the country is led by a 5-party centre, right majority coalition. Now, getting 5 different parties to agree on dinner is tough, let alone running a country. But despite those ideological differences, this government is expected to stick it out until its term ends around 2025. On the global stage, the political winds have definitely shifted. The situation with the war in Ukraine has dramatically pushed Czechia to adopt a much stronger, more open pro-Western foreign policy orientation, really solidifying its spot within the EU and NATO. That's been a major focus, but it's also been a bit of a hurdle for another top priority, getting their budget books in order, or what they call fiscal consolidation. Which brings us to the money. The country's GDP was valued at an impressive $345 billion in 2024. So, the good news is that the economy is resilient, and it's expected to pick up speed again, largely because the growth in real wages is finally fueling household spending. But the bad news is, the government is facing a persistent hole in its public finances, a structural deficit. They've already put a consolidation package in place, which means the budget deficit is projected to be around 2.3% in 2025 and 2.2% in 2026. Why that persistent deficit? Well, the country has serious rising expenditure needs in areas like defence, infrastructure, energy and education. Experts look at the situation and estimate that if they were to fully meet these crucial needs, the deficit could realistically widen to as much as 5.6% of GDP. So the next government has this massive, difficult choice ahead. Do they just keep delaying the hard decisions with little partial measures? Or do they adopt a big, structural reform programme to enhance spending efficiency and address those rising costs, especially those linked to an ageing population? It's a classic political dilemma. On the bright side, the Czech National Bank has done some heavy lifting on the price front. Headline inflation is projected to drop to a manageable 2.2% in 2025 and hopefully hit the sweet spot of 2% in 2026. And looking ahead, Czechia's future success really hinges on three critical areas. First, they need a big dose of innovation. They have to boost their capacity and business dynamism to revitalise productivity, growth and convergence. Second, the green transition is massive, particularly for the dominant car manufacturing sector. That industry's long-term performance depends entirely on whether it can successfully transition into the electric era with investments in battery production facilities and accelerate policy action to replace coal. And third, they need to focus on skills, which means tackling shortages, addressing inequalities in education, and expanding opportunities for workers to reskill and upskill throughout their careers. So, in short, the Czech Republic is in a strong position, leveraging its Central European location and industrial base, but it faces a crucial period right now, and it must decide between simply maintaining the status quo or making the difficult structural reforms necessary to truly transition into a higher value, sustainable 21st century economy. But honestly, numbers and politics only tell half the story. If you want to feel a country, you have to talk about its culture and its people. For Czechs, culture is an absolutely essential part of their national identity, and for visitors, it presents endless possibilities. Think grand, venerable institutions like the National Theatre, renowned for its impeccable productions of opera, ballet, and drama, or the esteemed National Gallery, which houses extensive collections of both Czech and international art. These places aren't just for tourists, they're frequently visited by nationals too. There's also a deep ingrained connection with the Jewish community that forms a profound layer in the national narrative. This enduring link is seen everywhere, from the spectacular historic Jewish quarter in Prague to the beautiful, revered synagogues throughout the country. Institutions such as the Jewish Museum stand as poignant and essential reminders of the significant cultural contributions of Czech Jewry over the ages. Now let's talk about the good stuff. Food and holidays. Czechs know how to eat and celebrate. Staples of the Czech diet are hearty and comforting, like potato and sauerkraut soups, which locals call bramborova polevka and zelná polevka, respectively. Then main courses often feature pork and chicken, served with those fantastic filling dumplings, either bread dumplings, hauskové knedlíky, or potato dumplings, bramborové knedlíky. For dessert, you might grab a delicious fruit-filled dumpling, some apple strudel, or a decadent honey cake. And of course, you cannot talk about Czech culture without talking about beer. Bohemia has a brewing tradition that dates back to the early 19th century, and the Czechs are famously among the world's most avid beer drinkers. But if beer isn't your thing, don't worry. Wine, locally produced in the sunnier region of Moravia, is also super popular. And when it comes to holidays, Czechia has a great mix of the historic and the religious. They have 7 public bank holidays, including New Year's Day and Independence Day on October 28th. There are also days that specifically commemorate their dramatic past, like the Day of Slavonic Apostles Cyril and Methodius on July 5th, Jan Hus Day on July 6th, and the Day of Students' Fight for Freedom and Democracy on November 17th. But what's fascinating is that even in a highly secular country, most Czechs, including atheists, still celebrate Christian holidays. Easter and Christmas remain the oldest public holidays, recognised even during the communist period. The main Christmas celebration is on Christmas Eve, where the tradition involves part of the family decorating the tree while the rest prepares the big Christmas meal, which is traditionally carp, often purchased live from huge wooden tubs set up in the cities during Christmas week. So you see, from the Slavic era literature to the rich Jewish history, from the deep brewing traditions to the enduring holiday celebrations, Czech culture is a wonderful tapestry of resilience and artistic depth. Now, if you could choose one Czech tradition to try, would it be drinking Moravian wine or eating carp on Christmas Eve? Personally, I want to try both, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this next one.